There is a word Naoya Inoue had never once needed to use after any of his 32 professional victories. Not after knocking men out in a single round, not after becoming a 4-division champion, not after being nicknamed the Monster by a sport that rarely hands out that kind of title lightly. That word is relieved. On May 2nd, 2026, inside the Tokyo Dome, Naoya Inoue finally used it. And by the time the final bell had rung that night, the entire boxing world understood exactly why. Going into that night, Inoue was 32-0, 27 of those wins by knockout. The undisputed super bantamweight champion of the world, and by nearly every ranking that mattered, the second best pound-for-pound fighter on the planet. Standing across from him was Junto Nakatani, also undefeated at 32-0, also a multi-division world champion, also Japanese. This wasn't just another title defense. This was billed by the people who cover boxing for a living as the biggest fight in Japanese boxing history. 55,000 fans packed into the Tokyo Dome, the largest all-Japanese boxing event ever staged, to watch two undefeated legends of their own country try to end each other's perfect record. To understand why this particular matchup carried so much weight, you have to understand what each man had already sacrificed to get there. Inoue had spent over a decade tearing through weight divisions that most fighters take an entire career to move through once. Junior flyweight, junior bantamweight, bantamweight, where he became undisputed, junior featherweight, where he became undisputed again. Every division he entered, he eventually cleared out entirely, leaving no meaningful challenger behind who hadn't already tasted defeat at his hands. Nakatani's path had been just as relentless, even if it unfolded slightly in Inoue's shadow. He'd won world titles at flyweight, junior bantamweight, and bantamweight, becoming a 3-division champion in his own right, before making the leap up to challenge Inoue directly at 122 pounds. That leap wasn't small. It meant abandoning a bantamweight throne he had dominated, vacating a title he could have defended comfortably for years, all for one shot at the man Japan considered untouchable. The two men had been building toward this moment for over a year. After beating Ramon Cardenas in May 2025, Inoue turned to the camera and called Nakatani out directly, telling him, "One more fight, and then I'm going to get you." Nakatani's own trainer, Rudy Hernandez, had been just as vocal, telling reporters they wanted to face Inoue before he started to decline, saying the credit would mean more if they beat the best version of him rather than an aging one. Nakatani himself wasn't shy about believing he had the tools to make that happen. At 28, 5 years younger than Inoue, he carried real physical advantages into the ring, including a meaningful height and reach edge. Odds makers still made Inoue a heavy favorite, roughly -420. But nobody who understood what Nakatani had already accomplished across 3 weight divisions expected this to be easy. When fight night finally arrived, the opening rounds played out exactly the way a chess match between 2 elite technicians should. Both men moved carefully, feeling out distance, unwilling to give the other an opening. Inoue worked behind his jab, controlling range and footwork, banking the first several rounds on pure precision rather than power. But somewhere around round 5, the fight the entire boxing world had been waiting for finally started. Nakatani began landing combinations and straight lefts that Inoue hadn't faced from anyone in years. In round 6, Nakatani built on that success, countering with clean lefts and winning his first clear round of the night. Through round 7, it was close enough that ringside observers couldn't agree who was ahead. Then came the stretch that made 55,000 people question what they were watching. Round 8, round 9, round 10, Nakatani's best rounds of the fight. He pressured behind combinations and power shots that actually backed Inoue up, turning what many expected to be a coronation into a genuinely competitive fight on the scorecards. What made this stretch so remarkable wasn't simply that Nakatani was landing punches. Plenty of fighters had landed clean shots on Inoue before, without ever threatening to actually win rounds against him. What Nakatani was doing was different. He was imposing rhythm, dictating pace, forcing the champion to react rather than dictate. For 3 consecutive rounds, the fighter everyone assumed would be steamrolled looked instead like he might genuinely be the better man in the ring that night. In round 10, Nakatani started fast, continuing the rally that had defined his best stretch of the fight. Then, in the closing seconds of that same round, an accidental clash of heads opened a cut above his eye. Blood began interfering with his vision almost immediately. Inoue, who by his own admission had been briefly buzzed earlier in that very round, gathered himself and capitalized in the closing seconds before the bell. That cut changed everything. Nakatani would later say the injury, along with what he believed was possible orbital damage, hampered him badly down the stretch. In round 11, Inoue pulled away with cleaner boxing and higher volume, while Nakatani struggled to see clearly through the blood. In the 12th and final round, Inoue boxed smart to the finish, landing the cleaner shots while Nakatani pressed forward, unable to overcome either the cut or the deficit he now faced on the scorecards. When the final bell rang, there were no knockdowns to point to, no single moment that had decided the fight. Just 12 hard-fought rounds between two men who both, until that night, had never lost. The scorecards were read: 116 to 112, 115 to 113, 116 to 112. All three judges for Naoya Inoue. Unanimous, but far from the kind of blowout the champion's reputation usually produced. Inoue improved to 33-0-27 by knockout. Nakatani, for the first time in his professional career, had a loss next to his name. 32 wins, 1 defeat, 24 knockouts. There was no chest thumping in the ring afterward. Just a champion who looked like he meant every word he said next. Today I executed the plan that I'd been saying before the fight, to stay focused on winning, to make sure I was the one who came out as the winner, Inoue told reporters. He didn't downplay what Nakatani had brought into that ring either. As you all know, Nakatani is a mentally strong boxer. The fact that he is in the top 10 pound-for-pound rankings makes this win worthwhile. For 6 years, the conversation around Naoya Inoue had centered on ceilings, on just how high a fighter this dominant could actually climb. May 2nd didn't lower that ceiling. It simply proved, for the first time with this much on the line, that one exists. Nakatani, despite the loss, walked away from Tokyo Dome having lost nothing that matters in the long run. 32 wins, one incredibly close night against arguably the best fighter alive, on the single biggest stage his sport has ever built in Japan. If anything, his stock rose in defeat. Terence Crawford himself was in attendance that night, watching from ringside as Michael Buffer handled the introductions for what many are already calling an instant classic. And the division isn't finished shaking from what happened. Somewhere in the lower weight classes, another undefeated pound-for-pound star, Jesse Bam Rodriguez, has been building his own case as boxing's next great multi-weight threat, with his camp openly targeting Inoue next. If the best version of Naoya Inoue needed every one of 12 rounds, a controversial head clash, and genuine championship round adversity just to get past Junto Nakatani, the question the entire sport is now asking is simple. What happens the next time somebody younger, hungrier, and just as dangerous gets the call? That question matters more now than it would have a year ago, because for the first time in his career, Inoue has shown the rest of the division exactly where the cracks might be. Fighters with a real height and reach advantage, who are willing to be patient early and commit fully once an opening appears, now have a blueprint. Nakatani didn't need power alone to make those middle rounds competitive. He needed rhythm, patience, and the discipline to wait for his moment instead of forcing it. That combination had never been thrown at Inoue with this much precision before, and the tape from that night will be studied by every future challenger who believes they might be the one to finally end the streak. It also raises harder questions about what comes next for Inoue himself. At 33, with a career built on relentless activity and a willingness to face anyone in front of him, the physical toll of a fight like this one doesn't simply disappear because the scorecards went his way. 12 rounds against a fighter who was genuinely competitive for nearly half the fight is a very different kind of night than the majority of his knockout wins, which often ended before real fatigue or adversity ever entered the picture. How his body responds to that kind of night and how quickly he's able to recover heading into his next fight will say as much about his future as anything that happened inside the Tokyo Dome. For Nakatani, The loss doesn't close the door the way losses sometimes do for other fighters. If anything, it opened one. He proved, on the single biggest stage Japanese boxing has ever constructed, that he belongs in the conversation with the best fighter in the world, not as a name padding out a resume, but as a legitimate threat who came within a controversial head clash of changing the entire outcome. A rematch, whenever it happens, would no longer carry the same lopsided expectations. The gap between the monster and the man who nearly stopped him has never looked smaller. The monster is still undefeated, still the undisputed champion. Still, by nearly every account, the best fighter in the world at 122 pounds. But for the first time in 6 years, the boxing world watched him pushed to the very edge of what he had and come out the other side, not celebrating, but relieved. That's not a weakness. That might be the scariest version of Naoya Inoue yet, the one who now knows exactly what it feels like to be tested and still found a way to win. Champions are often defined by the wins that come easily, the nights where dominance is never in question. But the fights that actually reveal who a fighter is happen on nights like this one, when the plan breaks down, when the opponent refuses to fold, and when the only thing left to rely on is whatever has been built through years of preparation and sacrifice. Naoya Inoue walked into the Tokyo Dome as a legend already. He walked out of it as something the sport had never quite seen from him before, a champion who had been tested to his absolute limit and answered every single question the hard way.